Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to our IPRI's podcast. Today, our guest is Madam Temina Janjua, and she's going to be here talking to us to help commemorate the International Day of Women in Diplomacy. Thank you so much, Madam, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Madam, you've had a long and very illustrious career as a diplomat in Pakistan. So, in particular, what we would want to talk about is the role of women in diplomacy. So, in your career, I think I would start by what was the biggest hurdle in getting to where you are today?
Thank you, Maham. I think we should never start with hurdles. We should start with the positives. And there were lots of positives which contributed to my being at the top of the Foreign Service of Pakistan. And those, the most important, I think, that one needs to underscore, whether it's a man or a woman in diplomacy, is hard work, consistent hard work. I used to tell all my colleagues that you don't have to work for a few years and then stop. You have to prove your worth every day. And that is a challenge for both men and women in the Foreign Service of Pakistan or any other foreign service. I was, as you say, a diplomat for the Foreign Service for Pakistan abroad. I've done about 35 years of service. And in all these 35 years of service, what helped me most was my hard work, my commitment, and most of all, the consistent support I got from my seniors. And that is something that I think is very valuable for me, because consistently, I had seniors who recognized the talent, if I may say so, and the hard work, and were able to help me move forward as well. While I did not to stop at any stage, because that is a requirement.
Thank you, madam. And particularly to your work, did you feel like that diplomacy in Pakistan is different for men as compared to women, and internationally as well? Did you feel that women look at diplomacy from a lens that is different from that of men?
Well, I'm not quite sure what that means, because diplomacy is diplomacy, whether it's men playing diplomacy, working on diplomatic issues, or women playing on diplomatic issues, working with diplomatic issues. So I think there is very little difference as far as diplomacy is concerned. But yes, there is obviously, women have their own challenges, men have their own challenges. And it is important that women recognize their own challenges and do not allow these challenges to come in the way of representing Pakistan. Let's not forget that when you're a diplomat abroad, a Pakistani diplomat abroad, for example, it is a huge, I think, responsibility, as well as it's a huge honor for a woman, and here we talk about women, to represent Pakistan abroad. Women, I have worked with many senior colleagues as well, and my junior colleagues as well. And I've always told them that it is such a huge honor for anyone to represent any country and to represent Pakistan whether in a bilateral context or a multilateral context. Most of my career was in a multilateral context, and I can tell you that Pakistani diplomats are recognized with great appreciation in the multilateral context. And I especially refer to multilateral context because that's a place where more than 192 countries are sitting together and discussing and negotiating. It is where the steel of the Pakistani diplomat shows. It is where the learning, it is where the hard work, and it is where the commitment of the Pakistani diplomat shows. At no point, at no venue have I seen Pakistani diplomats doing lesser than most of their competitors. And women do extremely well in multilateral fora. So I think it's an honor for any Pakistani woman to be a part of the Foreign Service of Pakistan and to be able to contribute to discussions, international discussions effectively. In Pakistan, you're not a diplomat, you're a civil servant. So obviously you work as a civil servant and you are treated accordingly. But let me say that the Foreign Service of Pakistan is a very small service, about 500 officers as such. And having 500 officers, it is, everyone almost knows everyone else. So talent, hard work is recognized and encouraged. And that is where, and therefore it is a place, I often said, it's one of the best services for any woman to join, because it gives her national opportunities as well. Not as much as perhaps in some of the other services, but representing Pakistan and internationally as well. It is a huge responsibility, but as I said earlier, a massive honor as well.
Thank you, madam. And madam, since we're talking about Pakistan, my next question is that when we talk about diversity and inclusion, women are the first topic in that. So with regards to the Foreign Service of Pakistan, how do you see the role of women as compared to men, and the amount of women that go into foreign service as opposed to men? You've seen it over a large span. So do you feel like the women are now increasingly coming more into the foreign service and as opposed to men, and what is the gender balance there?
Well, when I joined the Foreign Service, we were just two women in our batch, of a batch of about 11 people. So it wasn't that bad, but it was two women. But both of us have, I think, done very well. But now I understand that the ratio of entrance at the entry level of women is quite high. It's almost 50%. Actually, it could be in certain classes more than 50%, certain batches more than 50%. Almost, I saw one batch where there were about 65% women. So there is encouragement for women to join the Foreign Service, because they get an opportunity of working with people who have worked internationally, who are able to compete with women and not make it as a gender issue, but as an officer working with officers. So it is competitive, yes, but it is also provides an opportunity for women to be able to pursue their careers and be respected for the work they do. Yes, of course, there may be cases of, as in any other service, there may be cases of women who may find some difficulty. Maybe some people later find out that they are not suited for a certain career. So those things may happen. But I think mostly women who join the Foreign Service continue to stay with the Foreign Service and do reach the position of ambassadors, which is a big plus and a big honor, as I said earlier.
Thank you, madam. And madam, on that note, so for women who become ambassadors in countries which are mostly male dominated, including in their civil service, do you feel like those women face more challenges when operating in such countries?
You see, when you do something in Pakistan, what are the professions that mostly women go to? Doctors, not engineers, doctors, teachers, etc. But it's just that when you try to go to a new field, there'll always be some differences, some difficulties there. But those are not difficulties that you cannot surpass. There may be challenges, but not challenges that you cannot overcome. So I have worked mostly, as I said, in the multilateral context, and in the multilateral context, a competitive woman is a plus for any country. A competitive woman diplomat is a plus for herself, for representing Pakistan, for example. And I think and also in the bilateral context, I mean, if you look at, you're talking about countries where men are, there's a male-dominated societies. When you look at the statistics that are available, even now, countries, there are just a few countries that have 50% representation of women in their foreign services. There's Canada, I think, on the top, some of the Nordic countries, but everyone else has very limited number of women, and they're getting better and better. For Pakistan, at this time, we are about 23% women in the foreign service, which is sizable considering in the past that there was a time when there were no women at all. We need to do better, but I can tell you that whenever you have a good woman diplomat in the foreign service of Pakistan, she's appreciated and allowed to do any work that is there. It doesn't matter whether it's competitive or not. I'll give you an example that earlier on, there were certain areas that were limited to men only, like arms control and disarmament. But that also, we broke the barrier in Pakistan, and we had women working in some of the most important security-related missions as heads of missions. There were times when I was permanent representative and ambassador in Geneva that we had the most important security-related missions headed by women, whether it was Brussels, whether it was Vienna, whether it was New York, whether it was The Hague, of course, Geneva. And at the end of the day, our instructions on security-related issues came from the additional secretary in charge of international organizations and disarmament and arms control. So you can see that that kind of barrier which had developed, which was in the minds of a few earlier on, was broken as well. And then in the future, I mean, I was PR here in Geneva, and I dealt with the Conference on Disarmament, which is the foremost negotiating forum on arms control and disarmament issues. Then we've had many of a few of our new director generals for arms control and disarmament, especially in the chemical domain, who are women and who continue to work there. We have a director who's there and we've had in the past a director who did the UN disarmament scholarship, which is vital and which enhances your credentials as well. So right now there's a young lady who's already done, she's a director in the Arms Control and Disarmament Division, who's done this course again. So there have been many possibilities where areas which were earlier on considered to be taboo, quote, not taboo, but restricted to men. Women have broken the barriers or the class ceilings and that. So that is a must, a recognition that we must give to the Foreign Service of Pakistan. And I can tell you that when I quoted this, when I was at conference, the permanent representative to the Conference on Disarmament, when I quoted this in the Conference on Disarmament, people were very surprised, but very appreciative. So there's no area that women can't work in or deal with.
Definitely, madam. And madam, on that issue, you've spent most of your career in multilateral organizations. So, and even in the Western countries, there is a perception that, and Henry Kissinger has quoted that diplomacy is a hawkish, male-dominated profession. So, do you feel that there is a different perception of people when they're dealing with female diplomats internationally, or is the perception now getting better over time?
I would disagree with Mr. Kissinger now, because now it's a different world. Maybe when he was started off, it was hawkish and whatever, but there is no such thing as hawkish diplomacy or dovish diplomacy. For some, I was hawkish in many issues, but that doesn't mean that that it is that women have it is a hawkish profession only. In multilateral diplomacy, I did not work with UN multilateral organizations. I worked in multilateral diplomacy, so there were lots of international organizations that I dealt with as a representative of Pakistan. And I can assure you that whenever you needed to be tough, you had to be tough for national interests. And whenever you needed to be a little soft, ready to negotiate. And of course, that is one of the challenges that a diplomat faces. One, to ensure to always keep in mind your national interest. And secondly, to be ready to negotiate with other countries, to create the space for your national interest to be accommodated as well. So it's challenging, but it is, I mean, if you talk about it being hawkish, there are diplomats from Nordic countries, Canada as well, that are women and work on very, very serious issues, like women in Pakistan. And I've quoted to you a number of women who worked in security-related issues. So I'm not too sure if it is hardline hawkish. You can be hawkish because it's your country's national interest, and you can be soft when a negotiation is required to take your national interest into account in any negotiations.
Thank you, madam. That quite sums up the situation currently. And now I'd like to ask you about your own personal journey. So could you tell us one moment that you found really rewarding as a female diplomat from Pakistan?
I think representing Pakistan, speaking on behalf of Pakistan, lifting the Pakistan's flag, lifting Pakistan's plate with its name on it is always an honor for any Pakistani diplomat or for any diplomat from any part of the world. To be able to speak on behalf of your country, to be able to speak on behalf of the 122 million people of Pakistan is a huge honor and a huge responsibility. And I would always tell my colleagues when I was ambassador in Rome or ambassador in Geneva, that let us not forget that we are representing the hardworking people of Pakistan. We are representing every farmer, every worker, every person who works hard every day to ensure that they are best represented abroad. And we should always take that responsibility with a great deal of honor and with great deal of good sense. That's the high moment. I don't think I can think of any bad moment because I always have been very support. People have been very supportive. My seniors have been very supportive of me. The one thing that one of my bosses always said is, and one thing that one needs to always do is to have fire in the belly for Pakistan. And that is what moves you forward.
Thank you, madam. And on that note, we are going to come to our last question is what would your advice be to younger girls who are aspiring to join the foreign service and become diplomats and spokespersons for Pakistan?
Number one, I think women do very well in the foreign service, but I also think that it's important that all women who join the foreign service must never think that anything is small or big, because everything you do is for Pakistan. So it is never is it small or big. You have to work hard for Pakistan. And that's the most important thing. And the next thing is something I just said, which was one of my bosses said, always have fire in the belly for Pakistan. If you have fire in the belly for Pakistan, you believe in Pakistan, then there's nothing that can stop you from becoming a top diplomat internationally, because it is not only your talent inside Pakistan, but it is your faith in Pakistan, and it's your faith in your country and in your desire to work for Pakistan that makes you, even amongst the 190, 192, 93 members of the UN, the best diplomat, and that is what you should strive to be.
Perfect. Thank you so much, madam, for joining us. We hope that this conversation helps other people who are trying to enter the foreign service, and particularly women. We look forward to having future sessions with you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Mahan.
Thank you.